Every time I film a new video, it's like I've bought a new tail. I got like 3 more since the last tail video that I made. 3. Hi guys, welcome back to my Therianthropy. You may call me Thorn, and in today's video I want to talk about differences between real fur tails and faux fur tails. Faux is French for fake, so I'm talking about fake fur tails. I'll mainly be talking about how to tell the differences between faux fur tails and real fur tails when it comes to their looks, how they look and how they are made, etc. This is mostly because I figured that on several platforms real fur tails are actually sold as faux fur tails, which is very bad, and those tails are very most likely from a cruel fur farm. So I'll basically be trying my very best to prevent people from buying a real fur tail while they meant to buy a faux fur tail, because you will be financing cruel fur farms, and that's pretty much the last thing that you want. As stated in my previous video about fur tails, there isn't much of a difference between faux fur tails and real fur tails when it comes to how ethical they are, because for example real fur tails, they generally are way better for the environment, but there is a slim chance that you accidentally buy a tail from a cruel fur farm. So basically you accidentally buy a tail from a fox that has very straight up been abused in its past. I have actually made a video in the past about how to tell ethical fur farm tails from cruel fur farm tails, so you can kind of check that out for yourself if you want. I also heavily recommend checking out the comments of that video, because I have actually added a couple of notes to it a couple of days ago, corrections I've made or additions that I've made from comments that I have been witnessing where I was kind of like, you might want to know this information too. And you may be thinking, oh, I'll just buy a faux fur tail instead because that is way better and I don't get the risk of accidentally buying a cruel fur farm tail. Well, the issue is that faux fur tails, the fur from faux fur tails is actually made of plastic, and those plastic particles are being thrown into the environment when you buy a faux fur tail. So there's basically downsides to each of them, and whether you want to buy a faux fur tail or a real fur tail is totally up to personal preference. So really just do whatever you want to do, so long as you've done research. So that's a bit of information on how ethical real fur tails and faux fur tails are. Now I definitely wanted to dive deep into the appearance and how to tell the two apart. So as you may know, I'm personally someone who prefers buying real fur tails. Of course, most of them are ethical except for one, because that was my personal mistake. And furthermore, everything has been researched very well, and I've really looked into whether they are ethical or not. But yeah, they are definitely real. They once belonged to an actual fox. In order to recognize and understand a real fur tail, you have to really look into the anatomy of a real fur tail. First of all, you have usually a bit more of a slimmer tip on the top, because that is the part that has been connected to the butt of the fox or whatever animal the tail is from. So usually a tail starts off with like a slimmer tip. And going down from there, there's actually a leather strap inside, because of course every tail used to have a bone and used to have flesh. And what fur farms or shop sellers do is they take out the bones, they scrape off the leather, and then you have very healthy leather that you can actually use. And don't worry, this may sound a little harsh, but that's basically what happens to every bit of leather that we sell on the market currently. All leather that you can currently buy has once been attached to flesh and bone, and this has simply been scraped off, and that's kind of the normal way to go. So this is actually the leather that I am referring to. With some tails you can open it up, with other tails it has been sewn shut. Basically when you check out the leather strap of a fur tail, you can also kind of see its condition. With the leather inside you can also kind of check the health of the fur and the health of the leather, and kind of see what the condition is of your tail. For example, if the leather inside is kind of like reddish or kind of moldy in a way, then that's definitely not a very good condition. I also do not recommend keeping your other tails with that certain tail to prevent the mold from spreading, potentially. It's also good to notify that the leather strap ends a little earlier than the fur. So that means that the fur around the leather strap eventually ends up in a tip and kind of goes down like that. There's a couple of faux fur tails out there that do not have that trait of the fur kind of ending up in a round tip like that, because it's growing around the tip of the leather. Then there are other traits, the most significant one being that real fur tails bend incredibly well. They can like swing like this because the leather is insanely flexible, and that's something you can definitely tell. Unless the tail has become wet, because once leather becomes wet, it hardens and then it's no longer as bendable. This one, for example, is still quite bendable, but the top has once been hardened a little bit because it got wet. Therefore, this area is a little more sturdy and it doesn't bend as well. The fur is also usually a lot more soft, a lot more matte-like, so not very shiny compared to plasticky faux fur tails. The fur is generally more comparable to, for example, the fur of your dog or your cat, for example. It's very soft, but it's kind of matte-like. It's not incredibly shiny. The fur generally also kind of grows diagonal in a way, so you can definitely tell that it's going down. However, it's not going straight down. It's kind of diagonal in a way, and some real fur tails actually also have strands of fur that go literally each direction, so that's definitely also an indicator of it being a real fur tail. And the last indicator is that generally real fur tails have a very inconsistent fur color. All individual hairs of a real fur tail that hasn't been dyed generally has its own pigment. Like every single hair has its own color, and that's basically a big indicator of a real fur tail. Its hair, it's very inconsistent. For faux fur tails, there may have been certain wool or certain faux fur that has an inconsistent pattern, but it's still a pattern. You can definitely kind of tell that there's still a consistency going on, and that's something I will touch up on later. Now I will be talking about faux fur tails and kind of compare the qualities to what I have just mentioned about real fur tails. From what I have gathered, of course there may be exceptions out there, there are mostly 3 types of faux fur tails. The first one being foam tails, any kind of tail that has some kind of foam inside. Then there's yarn tails, which is usually made up of wool or yarn or anything like that is usually handcrafted. And there's also kind of like the other types of tails which are specifically made to look like a real fur tail but aren't actually real. Foam tails are very easily recognizable because they are usually hard, they are stiffened, there is foam inside, so it cannot move in any way. Because these tails are often a lot more cartoony, they don't use very inconsistent fur patterns, so the fur is usually also very consistent, one color or 2 colors maybe. And another notable thing is that these foam tails are often attached to you with a strap and a clip rather than a chain and a clamp. These tails are pretty recognizable because there's literally foam in it and there's like faux fur being attached around it, but it's definitely not real fur, you can definitely tell. Now there's a yarn tails, I've actually made a couple of them myself in the past. The fur of yarn tails is generally a lot more sturdy and a lot more bushy in a way because the fur, it's kind of been brushed out and therefore it's pretty much all over the place, and you can definitely tell that with most yarn tails that you will find online. They also very clearly do not possess that slimmer tip that real fur tails have. This is something that I was trying to go for when I made one myself, but it's pretty much impossible because you cannot make the braid inside any slimmer at the tip. With real fur tails you can definitely see that there's a very consistent flow of where the tips of the fur end, while for yarn tails this is very much all over the place. You can definitely tell that all those individual strains of fur are pretty much spiking everywhere, and they are not at all creating like a more consistent flow of fur. The tails also look a lot more strainy compared to fluffy, which is more of the case with real fur tails. This is like a really, like, you can definitely tell it's yarn, it's woolish. And the last indicator is that yarn tails often have a lot less realistic color patterns because usually the yarn that people use is never able to fully recreate the idea of an actual fur tail. There are definitely yarn balls out there that have a more inconsistent color pattern going on. The colors are either all over the place or it's very consistent because it's really hard to actually guide the colors into the right place when it comes to making yarn tails. And now there's the tails that are made to look like real fur tails but are actually faux fur tails. I will tell you, you do not find these very often. It's usually actually the other way around. When you actually look up faux fur tails online on Google, most of the pictures that you will see in your recommended are actually real fur tails. So definitely do not think that the real fur tail that you may want to buy could suddenly be fake. That's definitely not something that will happen. What you will find with tails that are made to look like real fur tails is that the fur in the end is still consistent in a way. Even if there's a whole pattern going on, you can still kind of tell that the colors have sort of been coordinated in that sense. It's not like this one, for example, where the colors are kind of all over the place with no direction whatsoever. Now do be careful because color tails doesn't necessarily indicate that it is a faux fur tail. This is a real fur tail, however it has been dyed. And you can tell because the fur is not plasticky in any way, it's still matte, it's still very fluffy. The colors are still inconsistent because they only colored the bits that would be a little lighter than the black. So seeing a color tail doesn't necessarily mean it is fake. However, for faux fur tails that are made to look like real fur tails, you can still kind of tell that the fur is kind of plasticky in a way and a little bit shiny perhaps. Faux fur generally often looks a lot more rougher because, as I told you before, real fur tails are incredibly soft. The slimmer tips are also very good indicators to look into in that case because faux fur tails generally do not have these slimmer tips, and the direction in which the fur grows is generally a lot more consistent. Because as you can tell with this tail, for example, the fur kind of grows in every direction, and that's not something you will find in faux fur tails made to look like real fur tails. The last tip I can give to find out if the tail that you are looking at is actually faux fur tail or a real fur tail is by generally just asking yourself, what if I were to paste this tail to the animal that it belongs to? Would that look realistic or not? Do not keep color in mind per se, because it could be dyed, as I told you before, but I'm mainly talking about texture-wise, pattern-wise, shape-wise, most importantly. Eventually you'll just kind of have an eye for it. To be honest, I do. When I look at a tail, I immediately can tell, oh, it's real or it's fake. Surely sometimes there are some that are kind of making me doubt, but usually when I doubt, I can kind of already conclude to myself that it's probably fake. Before I end this video, I actually want to go over a couple of shops that I can find online and kind of tell you guys how to determine whether it is a fake or a real fur tail. So let me just grab my laptop and we'll go over it together. So I have already put together a couple of Etsy shops to kind of give examples of what I am talking about. But before we do that, I actually want to do a quick Google search, simply typing in faux fur tail. See what happens. Okay, so you see all of these images popping up and you can already immediately tell, well, at least with my practice, I can already tell this one is not fake. This one is not fake. This one is not fake. These are fake for sure. Let's see. This one, not fake. This one, not fake. This one, definitely not fake. This one, not fake. This one, not fake. This one, also not fake. Mind you, these are all stock photos, which is an indicator that it may be from a cruel fur farm. So this is the whole reason why I wanted to make this video, is because it's kind of dangerous if you don't know what a faux fur tail / a real fur tail actually looks like. And you may actually buy a real fur tail instead of buying a faux fur tail, and then you may have actually bought a tail from a cruel fur farm, because these stock photo images are most likely from cruel fur farms. I'm going to Etsy, of course, because Etsy is generally a little safe. So I have all of these over here going on. Let's go to the more obvious one. These are definitely obviously fake because they don't even look anything like normal tails. These are the foam related ones with the straps and the curve in them. There's probably foam in it. And as you can tell, like, the fur is very plasticky, very shiny in a way, not at all soft. So yeah, that was kind of like an obvious example. Now we have this one, which is a little less of an obvious example because I'm not entirely sure if there's actually foam inside. However, you can still definitely tell that it is fake simply because of the shape of it. It doesn't look anything like a real fur tail because it's too long, it's too big. The fur, again, is very plasticky. The color is insanely consistent. So yeah, these are definitely fake and you can definitely tell. It's rather obvious to see. The next one, we have this one. This one may look, shape-wise, may look a little realistic, not when you flatten it. However, this is a clear example of a yarn tail. Of course, it is also sold as a yarn tail, so that's completely fine. You can mostly tell from the fur because the fur is very rough in a way. It's like a little like sturdy in a way. It's, as you can tell, it can kind of stand upright even. It's also kind of strainy. It's not at all smooth. It's not soft. It looks very sturdy. So there's also no slim tip at the top, which is more evident in real fur tails. So yeah, it's clearly not a real fur tail. This one is a little less obvious, but still obvious in other ways because the shape and the fur direction is a little more realistic because it's simply been cut and brushed that way. Very well done, to be honest. However, you can still clearly tell that it is a fake tail because when you look at it, the fur is simply still strainy. It's still a little plasticky, a little shiny. You can clearly see that shine, especially over here. This is not the same kind of fur that you will find on real fur tails. Now we have this one. This one is actually really interesting because this is the type of tail that I was talking about where they actually made it to look like an actual fur tail, but it's not actually a fur tail because these, especially over here, this looks kind of realistic in a way because the fur, it looks like actual fur, because they simply bought fur that was made to look realistic. But you can still clearly tell that these are fake, because you can't really tell the shape very well within these images. You can mostly see in images over here that they look kind of straight in a way. But more importantly, the fur is insanely consistent. It may look like there's a color variation in it, but there's still a pattern going on, and you can still tell. It's not like every single strain of fur is just a random pigment like with real fur tails. While this may be a little bit of a harder one, it is still definitely fake. It also helps that, of course, there are more obvious fake tails within this picture as well. Usually you do not sell real fur tails and faux fur tails together. That's really inconvenient, especially with the pricing. But then you have these over here, and you may think like, oh, these are fake because they are very colored, very brightly colored. These are actually real fur tails. They have simply been dyed. You can definitely tell by how soft the fur looks, the fact that there's still a slimmer tip at the top, and the fur kind of grows in every single direction, which is not something you will find with fake fur tails. So actually at the bottom you can see what the original tail looked like. This is like the white variant, but this is the original tail without dye at all. And you can definitely tell that it is real, because pretty much every single indicator that I've mentioned before is in this tail. Yeah, you can literally see leather over here. I'll put a circle on it in editing. This is literally the leather inside, so you can definitely tell that these tails are all real. Anyways, that is all I had for you guys today. I hope you guys liked this video. If you did, please leave a like down below, or maybe comment down below. Or if you have any critique, you can also comment down below, of course. And if you really like my videos and want to see more in the future, perhaps consider to subscribe. And I will be seeing you guys in my Therian territory in the next video. Bye. A massive thanks to my Therian territory members Bloody Toomey, Daphne Sten, Scar, Shadow the Wolf, Arden Zephyr, Cowbit, Thomas, Foilo, and Waita. Join the Therian territory membership for early access, extra features and content, and more personal contact with me.